Hi, it's Dave. Welcome to episode number 3 on parenting. And today we're going to be talking about, I think, one of the most stressful issues that parents have. And it's one of the issues I think parents have the most difficult navigating through. And this is the issue of sibling relationships, or when siblings just don't get along, they fight all day, parents get burnt out. I want to share kind of a different perspective, some different insights, some different thoughts. A lot of my videos, they're really built upon each other. It's really coming out of a completely different foundation of parenting than a traditional kind of parenting mindset. And it's really built on a foundation of parenting with principles rather than using rules and punishment. Parenting not necessarily with authority, but rather coming alongside to coach and to teach your kids the consequences, right, of different actions through various multiple timeframes in the future. So today I want to kind of dive into more specifically, like, how do you handle kids who fight? But then I want to share my experience of how I've handled that with my kids and what the result has been and some of the issues that we do ourselves. All right, so traditional parenting is when you find your kids fighting. Let's say you have two young kids. You typically, parents might berate them and they might yell at them or punish them or something. But oftentimes when you just yell and tell your kids, stop fighting, that just leads to tension in the relationship, but also it could lead to shame. And the reason is because kids often think in the moment, and that's typically what they're doing. And because they think in the moment, the now, they're really doing what they think is the right thing to do. And so whether they're pushing someone or shoving them or yelling or something, fighting, they really think that that's the right thing in that moment to do. Now, as a parent, you can come alongside them and you tell them they're wrong, tell them to stop it, but they don't agree with you because in their mind, they're doing exactly what they need to do. And you might explain to them all the reasons why you think they shouldn't fight, but they don't understand those reasons because your reasons might be completely just over their head or in a different angle. They're looking in their situation from their perspective with their urgency. And the result of parents yelling at their kids is the kids often feel a sense of shame because they're doing what they think is right, the kids in that situation, yet their parents, who is supposed to be their protector, right, their kind of intimate helper and teacher and coach, that relationship is starting to break down or it's starting to go against them because they're doing exactly what they think is they need to do, but they're being yelled at. And now it's kind of a crisis. It's a crisis of isolation in a way for the kids because they feel like, hey, the people who I'm supposed to rely on the most are turning against me, right? My parents are turning against me. I don't even understand it. A lot of parents also will resort to punishments. Let's say if they have their kids, they're fighting all the time and they're yelling and the parents feel like things are out of control. They'll do a bunch of timeouts and say, hey, you go over here, you go over there, or they'll spank the kids or ground the kids, right? Or take away things from the kids, etc. Or on the flip side, they'll give all these bribes, which might work temporarily, but they often lose their effectiveness later. And I don't think it's the right kind of precedent to set. But even with this whole punishment and this technique, it actually leads to resentment as well. Because if the kid really thought that he was wrong in that moment, he just wouldn't do it, right? The only reason why the kids are, let's say, fighting in that moment is because they really think that that's the right thing in that moment for them to do. And after a punishment, typically the parent is saying, hey, admit you're wrong, admit it was bad, right? And agree that you're not going to fight anymore. And the kid, even though they don't really want to do it, they don't even want to admit it because they don't even think they're wrong. They're just forced to agree with their lip service, right? That, oh, that fighting was wrong. I won't do it again in the future. And typically the kids are just learning to say things to please their parents or adults, even when they don't really believe it. My opinion, I think parents are the kids' best friend, their coach, and their teacher. And parents are the people who the kids should learn the most from. And if the kids are doing an action, let's say, that's harmful to themselves and or others, the parent's role is to help the kids see the consequences of their actions through multiple timeframes. So I want to give some more concrete examples. And I want to give some specifics on how my kids play together and how they relate together, and what I did and my wife did to kind of instill that type of behavior and those values. So my kids, they occasionally still argue and they fight. My kids are 3 and 6 years old. But generally speaking, I have never seen two siblings play as well as my kids do. And I've seen a lot of kids over the years. My kids, typically, they laugh all day together. They dance together, sing together. They look out for each other. They're sharing things together. They look forward to playing with each other. And as a parent, it really is the most amazing thing, where you see two kids that are just really just free. And the relationship also is just, it's mind-boggling how two siblings can be such close friends and play partners and look after each other. And I'm not saying that they don't ever fight. Sure, there are those occasions, but that's really the exception in my kids' relationship. Overall, it's just a mind-boggling sight to see the kids play and interact on such an intimate, trusting, and helpful level with each other. Now, let's go into some of the things that I did personally and my wife did together to kind of help kind of instill a certain behavior or mindset that I think is leading and is helping this process. So number one, as a parent, I was able to cast a vision of fun between siblings very early on. So when my wife was pregnant with our youngest, our son was between 3, was actually probably 2.5 or so. And I remember casting a vision and talking to my son just a lot. So this would be over several months. And the goal of kind of me discussing his future sibling was I wanted to get a buy-in from him as a 2.5-year-old, that having a sibling would be better, that he wanted to have that sibling, that the sibling wasn't just a reluctant occurrence that is out of his control, but rather it was something that he saw the benefit of and that he wanted to happen. And so several months before my wife gave birth to our youngest, I was just talking with my son, hanging out a lot, saying, hey, what do you think about, your mom being pregnant, and then how is life going to be with another, sibling, etc. And at first he was kind of reluctant, just, so. But then I would share like, oh yeah, with siblings, it's possible, hey, you can go to maybe more places, you can have more fun, you can have games to play, you could, all sorts of stuff. And as we're talking through this several months into it, my 2.5-year-old became about 3, and then he started to really get it. He started to really anticipate having a sibling. And I remember, through the birth process and through the early days, my son was just so excited to have a sibling because it was months and months of kind of discussing the benefits, right, of having a sibling. Number 2, the second thing I did was I caught and dealt with tension between siblings super early on. So probably when my daughter was between 6 and 12 months, probably 6 months or so, I noticed my son was kind of, I wouldn't say aloof, but he wasn't very interested in his sister. And I think part of it is because, especially for the first 6 months, let's say of a newborn's life, there's so much attention that's given into, just providing for that newborn, right? Feeding the newborn, taking care of the newborn. A lot of times the older sibling doesn't get the same attention that they used to get. And I think in that first 6-month process, my son started to have kind of this reluctance and the growing of a negative response. And I noticed it one night where I asked him, I caught something kind of strange. I said, hey, I said, hey, what do you think about your sister? And I remember the response was kind of negative. And I noticed that, and I made it a mission to coach him on this. And so over the next month, I started to share several things. And here's my strategy. I started to share stories of 2 sets of people. So one set of people, this is a hypothetical story, but it's like 2 siblings that grew up as adults and they became very old. And they really liked hanging out with each other and playing each other all throughout when they were kids. They grew up and they, were great friends. And then later on, they kept on talking to each other, visiting each other's houses, and they had kids and their kids played with each other. And every Christmas and Thanksgiving, they would come over and they would talk over the phone, just, every week or every month and just really have a great time together. And I would talk about that type of relationship. And then I would also talk about a type of relationship that many siblings actually have, which is the siblings grow distant. The siblings as adults, they don't really talk with each other. And, maybe as siblings, they did fight a lot and they didn't really like each other that much. And later on, right, they grow distance. They don't call each other. They don't go over for Thanksgiving and Christmas. Their kids don't play with each other. They're not really interested in each other. And I started to share these two visions or two ideas of the paths that siblings take. And I started to ask my son, like, hey, what kind of path would you like to have? Would you like to have the path where you're becoming best friends with your sibling and 50 years down the road, 60 years down the road, you guys talk just constantly and your kids play each other and you're just having a great time? Or would you like to be, have a sibling where you guys just don't like each other, don't play each other, fight a lot, and 50, 60 years from now, right, it's the same thing. You don't like each other. And over a month or so, talking to my son, he was about 3.5 at this time, it completely changed his mind and his thinking regarding his younger sister. And I noticed a complete change, and he started to get really positive regarding his attitude toward his sister. And when I look back at that moment, at that turning point, I realized that if I hadn't caught that kind of resentment or that negativeness early on, that would probably just fester. And it's not a type of thing that kids maybe just say publicly. It's something I had to fish for and really, be sensitive for. But once I was able to catch it, I knew how to change it and how to alter the perspective, because it's ultimately his decision, right? What path he wants to take. But it's true, there's many, many examples of different siblings taking different paths in their relationships. So that's up to him to know what his current actions and attitudes, what type of seeds they're sowing for the future relationship. All right, so that was a big turning point. All right, number 3. When my kids fight, there are no rules or no punishment if they fight. So this is one of the things. If you have rules and you have punishments, all the stuff for fighting, and then when they fight, then your parents get upset that their kids are breaking the rules and they have to give all this punishment. It's this huge just world war in the house, right? With rules and punishments and kids getting upset and kids don't even think they're doing anything wrong. In our family, we don't have these rules or punishments for basically anything, but we don't even have rules or punishment for fighting. If they fight, which, occasionally they do, the idea is, hey, I dive into it. I say, hey, what's going on here? Now, if it's kind of more physical fighting where they're pushing and shoving, so my goal is to help them to see their actions and the consequences to their actions in multiple time frames. So one angle is, if they're pushing and shoving and punching each other or something, that's actually physically dangerous. Meaning, if one kid actually falls to the ground and cracks his head on the tile ground, or there's something like a sharp metal object in the sticking from the ground and pokes their eye out, that's actually super dangerous. And a lot of accidents happen because kids aren't thinking like that. They're not thinking that they're pushing, they're shoving, they're fighting will lead to a big accident. But there are tons of examples of kids having bad accidents through fighting. And so sometimes I'll actually take my kids aside and say, hey, let's look at some videos of some kids having accidents, after they fought, what happened, right? And to see some of the stuff is brutal, the long-term physical injuries that kids have. And for my kids, I want them to see that, right? What the consequences could be long-term. And it's they're not thinking in the moment when they're fighting, something can happen where, it pokes someone's eye out and they can't see for the rest of their life for 50 or 100 years. But that's something that, an angle that I'm showing. The second thing is I'm approaching their fighting also in a relationship angle, meaning I'm trying to help them to see, if you guys are fighting and you continue to fight, right, this becomes a habit, then what's going to happen naturally? Naturally, we're not going to be able to live together because we're fighting and it's just dangerous. And so we'll probably have to live apart. So, I tell my kids, this, what do you guys want to do with this? Where do you want to go with this, right? If you guys keep on wanting to fight, maybe mom and, you will have to live in the RV and I will live with, your other sibling in another place or something, because we just can't, safely live together because we're all fighting. And there is this kind of bigger concept that in order to live together harmoniously, right, there needs to be a way to actually overcome and deal with, right, different conflicts in a way that isn't, right, dangerous and harmful. Sometimes I might even tell my kids, I don't tell them that much, but in the past, I brought up an example. Let's say my kids are really, just something is really bothering me where they're just at it together and they just, nothing is communicating with them. I might say, hey, I gave this example. It's like, well, why don't we try to avoid each other, not to play with each other at all, it's between siblings for one day. Let's do an experiment and see what happens. And they hate that experiment because they really love to play with each other. They really have a great time playing with each other. And so if I bring up that suggestion, they'll be both crying, saying, oh my gosh, I love to play with my brother or sister. How can you even suggest that we don't play with each other for a day, blah, blah, blah. But all that is doing is it's giving them an awareness of their actions, the fighting, that tension is causing certain, consequences in their relationship, in our family, in our household. And as they get aware of that, then this actually naturally starts to shape their behavior. Now, a lot of this that I'm talking about actually is not, I would say, simple quick fixes, meaning it's not something probably most people are going to do in one day and see these crazy results. Because in my experience, this has been over years and years of building a foundation of thinking, meaning I've built kind of this whole idea of parenting through principles, parenting through coaching, parenting through multiple time frames, understanding consequences. And so, for example, my son is 6, but he's been going through this since he was just a baby. And it's something that we've just dealt with like over many, many years, meaning before he was 1 year old, I was just chatting with him, even though he couldn't reply completely, but I could sense that he could understand. We would talk about a lot of things. And so it's built after a foundation of many years where my kids have been taught and coached in a way to see multiple time frames of their actions, and they understand that their actions have certain consequences to each other, certain consequences to the family, certain consequences long term, like 50 years down the road, etc. Now, I'm not saying my kids that's the forefront of their mind all the time. They're still kids, and part of the thing of kids is their forefront of the mind usually is just now, right? They're just in the now. That's how they make decisions. But by having a multi-year foundation of thinking and coaching and principles, what the result is, they're quickly able to actually shift and understand, there's consequence. I understand what you're talking about. We talk about this all the time, etc. So they're very comfortable. So even if they're in the now, right? Let's say there was an argument, etc. They're able to quickly get out of the now, quickly able to see multiple time frames, quickly able to engage in a discussion of kind of like talking about what's going on. And because of that, it's amazing because it quickly resolves conflicts. Like, for example, whenever we cut something like a piece of fruit, my daughter and son, they're always saying, oh yeah, one for the other sibling. Like, they're always sharing everything because they understand what's going on. They understand if they don't share something that they could fight over that thing, but it's something that they've discovered. They've actually created themselves. This whole thing of like sharing, food or things themselves. Even at the dinner table, sometimes when there's like just one thing that's left, they'll cut it in half and share it with each other. It's not even something we taught them. It's just something that they naturally come across, naturally develop because they understand this idea of consequences to their actions over multiple time frames. Another example is yesterday. So we had this interesting example where my son was at the table standing up. It was kind of after lunch, but he wanted some more olives. And so he's like, yeah, I want 4 more olives or something. And he's standing by the table. And then my 3-year-old daughter comes around him. And she wants some olives because, her older brother is getting olives. But she's not very happy that he's getting maybe all of the olives. She doesn't know. So she comes around him, but kind of kind of shoves him, kind of pushes him, out of the way a bit. And then he gets upset because he's like, what the heck, I'm just getting all of this, right? And so he pushes her back, like shoves her back. And then she's upset. She's like, what the heck? And she's not one to see. Both of my kids have their determined personalities, and so then they start to she grabs his hands really tight, but she's a 3-year-old, can't grab it that tight. He grabs her hands tighter because he thinks she's scratching him, and squeezes them really tight. And so she crumbles to the ground, and she's crying because, her older brother has squeezed her hands really tight. And I'm watching this, right? I'm watching this, and this is the sequence of events. So there's no yelling, there's no rules, punishment, berating, or harsh reactions or anything. I'm just kind of calmly here. And so I go, whoa, guys. I go, hey, this is kind of dangerous. You guys pushing and shoving each other. What if, you guys slip and fall and this is tile ground and you crack your head? Like, what's going to happen? Or what if there's something sharp here? You poke your eye. Do you want to not see for 50 years or something? And so I start redirecting their attention to what those actions of pushing and shoving is going to be. And then, they're like, oh, and then they kind of, talk about how, they're right or they're doing whatever. And so I understand that, because both of them in their moment, they think they're doing absolutely the right thing to do, right? They really believe that that's the one thing, the only way that they know how to act, which is for sure the right way to act, right? So that's the perspective that they have. That's how I'm viewing the situations. I understand that, I acknowledge that. And I say, hey, if you guys want to fight, right? That's the thing. It's their choice. I'm not going to force them not to fight, but hey, if you guys are going to keep on fighting and, we're going to become a fighting family, maybe you guys have to, I don't know, maybe we have to live somewhere else, or maybe you guys have to like stay outside during the day where, it's not as dangerous as, fighting inside or something. So I open the door and I go, why don't you guys, step out and, spend the afternoon or something fighting outside or something. And it's kind of cold. We're here in Texas and it's like, below freezing. So they're like, no way, we're not going outside. And in basically 1 minute after they're fighting, it's over, right? The fighting is completely over because it's ridiculous. They see how ridiculous it is to fight, but they've made that decision up where they're like, oh yeah, and they've moved on. So it was like 60 seconds and it's over. The fighting is over, and the rest of the day they have a fantastic time together, and we quickly move on. And I'm not going to say that that's going to be possible for most people first time, because it takes a lot, again, of foundation building, of understanding, thinking, consequences, and building trust. But a few points about this example is because we haven't pursued this thing of punishment and yelling and berating, we don't have a breakdown of trust or resentment in our relationship with our kids. Meaning, like, I've never punished our kids. I've never, screamed at our kids. I never, shamed them, berated them, or at least intentionally in any way. So there's an immense amount of intimacy and trust that my kids have for me and my wife, where when they see us, they don't see us as this authority figure coming down on them. Rather, they see us as a coach, as a friend, as a teacher, someone coming alongside to help them in that time and in that process. And because of that, there's a much higher level of effectiveness than coming from it as this enforcer of rules who doesn't understand the situation, etc. But that's one of the reasons why we're able to effectively deal with sibling conflicts, because there's this trust between the kid and us, but also there's a trust between the two siblings. They know that they're best friends, right? They know that they love playing with each other. They know that life is so much better together, and they really are committed, and they bought into a long-term vision of what a great sibling relationship could be. Now, some people might be watching this and they go, what the heck? How can a 2 or 3 or even 5-year-old really buy into a long-term vision of what a sibling relationship could be? Trust me, it's possible. I've seen my kid, 2 years old, really buy into that vision. Like, I think we need to give more credit to our kids than sometimes we do. Our kids really do have capacity in some ways to think through situations. A lot of times their now perspective, their reaction, their feelings take over for a time during stressful or emotional situations, but regardless, I don't think we should minimize the ability for our kids to actually think, to discuss, and actually understand stories. I love stories. Stories are a great tool to use to actually explain things. I'll probably do another couple episodes about that as well. All right. So last thing about this whole sibling rivalry, fighting, etc., is I like to focus on fun, on helping and exploring, and I like to just, most of my relationship with my kids, actually, I would say probably 95% or higher of the time that I spend with my kids is purely just being goofy, having fun, exploring, building stuff, playing games, just dancing around, singing, etc. And that's kind of the whole angle is, it's fun. It's great to have, a helping family, a family that really, enjoys each other, plays games together, shares with each other. And that's the attitude and that's the mentality that I'm planting in their relationship too, which is it's so much fun, right? Being together and helping each other, etc. And I think the result is kids are able to build empathy, and this is all relational skill. It's all relational skills to be able to understand how to build a relationship, how to overcome conflict, how to become more mature in relying on people in a sense, right? What we don't want, which I don't want, is I don't want my kids to have this isolationist type of experience where, the kids, their parents are yelling and my son or daughter feel like they're just all berated and alone and isolated and, separated from the world, and that's the safest place. And so they retreat into themselves and they can't trust their parents, they can't trust their siblings, they can't trust the world. I think that's actually a big obstacle to emotional development when that happens. Me as a parent, what I'm doing is I'm trying to protect my kids from those type of obstacles that can derail emotional maturity and emotional growth. And therefore, I'm protecting my kids against shame, against isolation, right? Against just kind of resentment. And I'm helping my kids quickly, if there is conflict, quickly absorb, quickly process that, and quickly get out of that, making the right choices and getting restored to a family, to relationships that are fun and happy and helpful and sharing. And and it's been a blast. I mean, one of the reasons why I've started this parenting channel is because it's such an amazing joy to see kids that are really free, that don't have resentment, that aren't just isolated and secluded, flooded with shame, and to be in an environment that really helps them to flourish and to grow. And I think in some ways this is, I call it, actually I think I need to rename this channel. I first initially called it 100x parenting, but I've been telling my wife, it's like infinite investment. What you invest into your kids, into their emotional growth, into their relational growth is infinite in its fruit and in its result, because it's, they're living many, many days and moments in their life, but it's also, they might have kids and might go on to, we don't know when history ends. And so, this is, it's crazy the type of impact I think parents can have. All right. This is, if you're short for time, feel free to stop the episode here. This is kind of like the general, kind of sharing. I want to share kind of one idea with some examples, in each episode. And I'll use the rest of the time to take for some questions. And we'll go ahead. Julio Chow says, thank you so much for this channel, Dave. I have 2 girls aged 1 and 4, so it is very similar to your children in terms of age difference. I take notes on this. Do you plan to make a book someday? Yeah, possibly. I would love to continue and share lots of episodes, because I was telling actually my wife, I think I need a couple hundred, at least 100 to 200 episodes to really share enough examples and enough depth in the thoughts, but also to, share, interact with you guys as well, in order for people really to understand the full extent of an approach that I'm sharing. And so maybe a book will come eventually. But I think it's also, I'm thinking, after a certain number of episodes, what's the quickest way that people can get onboarded, right, to an approach like this? So I think that's pretty important. Jan FM, hey Dave, I have a question. How do you view promising your kid like a lollipop if it does this, if they do this or stop that? Do you see it as a valuable contract, or is it rather manipulative and not helping understand? Yeah, again, I look at it from this perspective. The kids are doing what they want to do because they really believe that it's right in that moment. When you try to give something that is a punishment or reward, what you're doing is it's an external behavior mechanism where you're trying to change their behavior due to this outside punishment or reward, but it's not internal. It's not something that they internally believe that they should do. Because if they internally believe they should do that, they would do it, right? So therefore, it is kind of like manipulation. You're saying, hey, if you do something that you don't really believe in, right, I will either give you this reward or I will punish you or whatever. And my whole point is like, what the heck? Why don't you just start to work and change the internal focus, the internal compass, the internal value system, thought process, view of the kid? Like, we got to give our kids more credit. Our kids are able to understand. It's a lot of times it's the parents that have the lack of persuasion, the lack of ability, the lack of skills to really deliver and to explain, right, to the kids what's going on through multiple time frames. Again, stories are an amazing example. Videos of just, of different people leading extreme results, right, with certain actions. Letting your kids have that ownership of they need to decide, right? It's a sacred power they have. And that's kind of what humans are, being human is all about, having the power to decide, right? Why do we want to pull that away and force our kids to do something that they don't want to do or they don't even believe in? I think it's the opposite. We want to build up the conviction, build up beliefs so they understand what they want to do and they become strong in their beliefs rather than weak-willed people who are easily swayed and manipulated, right, by just, dangling carrots or sticks, right? I mean, that's, it's a tough one. Julia Chow, how did you come to your realization about all your first principles of parenting? Do you sit down in silence and take notes? How do you save them? Just remembering or writing? Yeah, I had a long 10-year period or so in my 20s where I was really recovering from my own kind of abusive childhood past with abusive parents. And I felt like I was really limited in what I could do because of the impact that it had on different parts of my life, my thinking. And I felt like I had to overcome that in order to go to certain places that I thought I needed to be. During that decade of kind of self-healing and introspection, I read through hundreds and hundreds of books and lots of different resources. And I started to understand a lot about development and a lot about psychology, a lot about character development, emotional development. And I started to realize how skewed I was because I just didn't have that nurturing environment. The house that I grew up in, the family I grew up in, was extremely manipulative. And it was basically a house of horror where we had this constant threat of physical violence against us. And I realized how distorting that was, how I didn't have the opportunity as a kid to build up my own convictions, my own beliefs, how I was always just in this constant state of fear and manipulation, kind of like a kid always just isolated in a corner. And in order to fix that, I was like, wow, it was pretty deep. I had to almost, in a sense, figure out how to parent that kid or grow those skills over time. And it took a while, it's not an easy process at all. But after doing that, when I got married and then we were having our first child, a lot of this parenting stuff, it became natural because I started to see a lot of the traditional parenting as not very beneficial, as actually antithetical to a healthy upbringing. And that's when I started to question a lot of this stuff. And I started to say, hey, how should it be? And it's some of the stuff that I went through just healing myself, I wanted to provide to my kids, right? I wanted to give them a sense of, hey, I'm always here for you, like I'm not going to break trust with you. I'm not going to like shame you and yell at you and hit you or anything, or even punish you because you did something that you thought was right. Like, I'm not going to break that trust. I'm going to come alongside you, and I'm going to build up character and values and empower you to make decisions. But I'm going to come alongside as a coach and really help you navigate, right, this life. And yeah, I really had this insight that, yeah, I'm like my kid's best friend in a sense, in a super long time period. For a short time period, I am the best friend, but I'm teaching them a lot of skills and ways of thinking and ways to see the world that they don't have the ability yet because their brain is still not making all the connections. They haven't completely been taught in that line of thinking. Therefore, I have a role as a parent to really come alongside them and build those thinking skills. All right, Phil Rock says, what to do when the kid doesn't want to come out of the shower and we are late for school, or just does not want to cooperate to what you are asking. Yeah. So yeah, this is kind of a tough one in a sense where once you have kids that are older, now you've set a precedent of many, many years. And to think that you can just quickly come up with an approach that fixes everything that you've done over the past, who knows, 10 years or so. I think we have to be first realistic with this, right? I mean, I'm not talking about quick fixes. This is actually a whole paradigm approach change. I think in my perspective and kind of with how I deal with stuff, there are times where my kids don't want to do certain things. So I'll give you an example. A couple weeks ago, I noticed my 6-year-old being a little bit more like, oh, I don't want to go out, or I don't want to, if we need to go somewhere, do something. He's like, I just want to stay home or something. And I noticed, I picked it up and I'm like, it's kind of interesting. It's where he's having a different idea of how things should play out. And he's like, I don't really like the idea or want to go out, or I'm not buying into what you're doing, right? I have a different buy-in. A lot of parents would fight with their kids and say, hey, you have to go or something. But the perspective I have is like, I'm like, first off, it's good that he has his own mind, his own convictions. So I'm like, hey, that's actually good. You're fighting for your own, desires and things. I like that. And the second thing, I'm like, oh, we need to share with him kind of the vision, right? The aim, the goal of why we need to go out this afternoon, and what we're trying to accomplish. And then we need to explain to him like enough where he has that choice to buy into it, right? Now, if he doesn't want to buy into it and he doesn't want to go, now he has to understand the decision, which is, okay, then we all have to stay home because we can't leave a 6-year-old at home. So now the decision is like, okay, if this becomes a habit, what kind of habit do we want to go into? Do we want to go into a habit where, we just don't go out anymore because, or do we want to get into a habit where we do go out and we explore and we do things together and we see a lot of things? And so we're framing this and giving to him as a decision where he's empowered now to make that decision. He's saying, oh, okay, interesting. Well, if we could stay home, that means everyone has to stay home. And that means this is setting kind of a habit or decisions to just kind of default to staying home and not going out. And is that the type of lifestyle I want to live for our family, right? Is that what we want to do? Or do we want to be a family that is, going out exploring and stuff and going together? And he's making that decision. And when we take time for that, he's able to come to that decision. And now when he jumps on board, he's on board, right? And so, I was able to quickly just change his whole mind in a sense by empowering him with those decisions. And so in a few minutes, he's able to go, boom, I'm in the car, he's on board, right? Going with us out to a bunch of errands, etc. And so it's that type of mentality where respect for their decision-making, respect for their ability to think through and to feel and to have convictions over certain things, that's not optional. A lot of parents think that they could force their kids to do whatever they want, right? And they have all these, tools, punishment, rewards, etc., to make it happen. But that's not the reality. The reality is our kids are very strong, determined personalities. And, we want to honor that. This is one of the most amazing things about parenting is you are, stewarded with managing, growing, nurturing, right? That strong personality. And yeah, it's not an option to say, forget it. My kid has no choice. I think that's kind of one of the starting points is no, the kids have choices. And that's something as parents, as a parent, I honor their choice, but it's my role to help them seed helpful habits that benefit them and others in life, and my role to teach that and to coach that. And through that teaching and coaching, I can have a huge impact on how I shape my kids' behaviors, actually, right? To the degree on how skillful and how complete and how empathetic my coaching is, it has a big impact on its effectiveness in communication with my son or daughter. And that heavily impacts, right, how they process things and how they make a decision, but it's still ultimately their decision. So yeah, again, this is a whole paradigm shift. A lot of times I think when you plant a foundation that's really strong, you do it for many years, and also you build up your skills in presenting, then there's a confidence where I can go places with my kids. Like, I know my kids are going to come. I know my kids are going to behave at a certain level outside because they know they do it themselves. They know like the benefits of doing it. And so it's actually, in a way, it's far more autonomous / more independent in their behavior than if they're kind of constantly told what to do. All right. Jan FM says, how do you view rhythm when raising a child? In my experience, rhythm is strength. Do you pay attention to how the day goes, like lunchtime or going to bedtime? Yeah, I think it's obviously different with each stage of having kids. I think rhythm plays an extremely important part earlier on, especially, with the infant, baby stages. Their rhythm and cycles are much shorter in a sense. After a certain time period, we've over the years actually kind of moved off of kind of more of a timetable or schedule, etc. A lot of times people might question like, oh, how do you, go to bed, etc. And we do have a certain time where we start cleaning up and we start, getting ready, etc. But the funny thing with our so we're kind of late risers. So our kids wake up between 8:30 and 9 a.m. in the morning typically. And because of that, they go to bed a little late. But we typically, start getting ready around 8 p.m. to clean up and then get ready, put on pajamas, etc. if we need to take a bath, etc. Around 9, we're getting together and we kind of have this like story time where my wife tells some story, I might read some books, I'll tell some stories, I'll make up some stories to my kids. They love that stuff, just crazy random stories. And then currently, like, our bedtime kind of changes depending where we're located, but currently where we're staying, I've got this recording space in a closet where I'm recording now, but it's in a separate room on the other side of the house. And so my kids, what they do is after the story time, they get 3 or 4, we say, okay, you guys can do 3 or 4 times where you run or to this other room on the other side of the house, and then we goof off for like 5 minutes or so. So it's just me and the kids. My wife is back in the other room. And so I'm just like kind of for 5 minutes just dancing with my kids, singing with my kids, doing some crazy stuff. And then after 5 minutes, I'm like, oh, 5 minutes are up. And then they go and they run back to the other room with my mom or with my wife, actually with their mom for, 5 minutes. And they do this back and forth several times. And they just have a blast because they're just running, dancing, singing the whole time. This goes on for 40 minutes or so. My wife's preference is to make it shorter. My preference is like, hey, this is fun time, like kids, when are you ever going to have, as a parent, this time back again where you have your kids just right before going to bed, they're just, bouncing off of walls, just having the time of their life, etc. So I love it. I just like hang out with my kids. So after 30, 45 minutes, it could take longer. They slowly, go to their beds. And by now, earlier on, they had a harder time sometimes, but by now we've kind of over the years really like they've kind of really bought into this idea of sleep, and it's not something we forced upon them. We don't even like tell them they have to sleep, etc. But they really bought into this idea of how important sleep is, that it's something that they want to do. So both of our kids really want to sleep at certain times. If they took a nap in in the daytime, it's tough to sleep. And so we're not pushing it, but yeah, generally, we're very accommodating, if they have a hard time sleeping, but generally they're going down at this age actually remarkably well on their own. And it's kind of mind-boggling because it's just a bunch of raucous and fun, the last hour, and yeah, they've taken it themselves. Now this current bedtime situation isn't like how it was always been. Obviously, there have been times of struggle. There's probably very few people who've had seamless bedtimes, and my kids do have a strong, determined personality too. So there are a lot of times where I had to say, hey, do you want us to stay up all night? And I'm serious about that. I'm like, hey, like, if you want to, we could stay up all night, or you can stay up all night, right? And I might just show, like, and we might talk about what that means, staying up all night, what that does to your body, whatever. And my son he's just convinced he doesn't want to stay up all night. He's convinced he needs his sleep, and that's what he's decided on his own for some reason. And I think we parents underestimate the importance of how much conviction and belief plays a role in the kid's mind. If they really believe they need to sleep, like that changes the game. It changes everything. If they don't really think they need to sleep and they're just doing it because you're telling them to sleep, right? And you say, you have to sleep, but they don't really want to sleep, that's a different game. Like, I don't even want to play that game because I know where that ends, That's like a never-ending battle. I don't want to play a never-ending battle. That's like setting me up for disappointment. It's setting me up to be exhausted, all the time fighting with my kids. I'm not trying to fight with my kids, right? I'm working with them. Yeah, so anyways, this is just some of my thoughts. All right, Andre Kaliki says, I plan to raise my kids child-led or unschooled. I was inspired by a book called Free to Learn by Peter Gray. Have you heard of it? Yes, I've read that book several years ago. Yeah, I mean, I think there's actually quite a bit of some interesting, thought coming out from different, schools of thought with parenting. You do have kind of the child-led or the unschooled approach. Again, Free to Learn by Peter Gray, and some other books. I kind of, yeah, okay, so here's my perspective. I think there's certain angles that I say, hey, that's obvious, kids want to pursue their interests, they want to learn, and to come alongside them and to do what they want to do rather than force them to learn something that they don't want to do. That makes sense. Where I don't know, where I kind of add my angles are where I think I realize with my kids at least that they need a lot of hands-on involvement from me and from my wife, where there's a lot of things that they have questions about that they struggle through that I need to be kind of right by them, and we need to discuss and we need to talk. Yeah, and so I think just the role of the parent. I mean, sometimes I think unschool can the spectrum can sway. Not all people, but some people can sway to an extreme where they're kind of just letting their kids go, and where they're not really supervising that much, right? They're saying, oh, they're free, right? But I think, and obviously, I don't think Peter Gray's complete on that angle. I'm just saying some people might take it to an extreme. My perspective is more, as a coach, as a person who wants to come alongside my kids, yeah, like that's a special relationship, and they can learn a lot, right, from their parents, their parent relationship with their parents, and I want them to learn as much as they can. And so I look at it more as rather I don't really completely like or terminology that's completely just hands off. Yeah, I like more terminology where it's you're giving them you're honoring their decision-making power. They're making the decisions, right? You're teaching with principles. You're coaching them, etc. And there is a partnership, right? There is a deep intimacy that you're walking together with your kids. Antonia Garcia says, super excited for this channel. My wife is pregnant and it will be our first child. Awesome, man. Congratulations, Antonia and Anthony Garcia. Yeah, I mean, I think in a way, when you are first preparing for when you're preparing for your first child, that is the prime time. That is the time where you can really think about stuff like this deeply. And you don't have to just accept how you were parented as the way to parent, or how you see other people parent as the way to parent, but you can actually question and say, okay, how do I really want to parent this child? And what is my legacy going to be, in terms of how I parent this child? And you can really start to dive into some of this stuff. So I just want to encourage you with that. All right, Essential Pharmacist says, same as you, I grew up in an emotionally abusive household where fear was constant. You talk about emotional growth and healing. How did you go about doing that? A lot of my process, I don't know if it's replicable for most people, because I did a deep dive, meaning I read through hundreds, if not thousands of healing books on psychology, inner healing, just all this stuff, self-growth, emotional healing, growth. And I spent countless hours meditating on it and really introspectively diving into it. That was my own personal approach. I will be bringing on, or the plan is to bring on to my channel, this channel, actually one of what I think is one of the best therapists in the country. He deals with a lot of just healing traumatic or kids with traumatic pasts, and his approach is amazing. And I'm planning to have him on my channel as a regular guest that would input into not just inputting a healing and nurturing environment for our kids, but also how can we also grow as parents, right? Be healed. Again, he's been super generous. I just talked to him last week. And so, the plan is to have him on as a regular guest, but I think this will be super awesome. He is definitely, in my opinion, from my research and from what I've gathered and all the people I've talked with, he is definitely one of the best. So I'm super excited about it. Mike Hunt said, how would you deal with your kids telling you they are bullied? All right, so here's my approach. I have no knowledge of exactly how old your kids are or what the situation is. All I know is this, this one sentence that you've shared. So I'll just give some quick thoughts on it. So first off, I would take it very seriously. This is huge. We're talking about if they're bullied, this is an abusive situation. It's a situation that can really impact their emotional growth. They can be really scared. They feel unsafe. Whenever someone feels unsafe, they retreat and become isolated, and it's a stunt in growth. And you don't want your child in that situation for very long. You want to overcome that as quickly as possible. Number two, your kid needs you. They need you to help them solve this problem. And and that's the whole thing about a bully situation, abusive situation, is the kids are typically in that because they don't know what to do or how to overcome. They need your help in that situation. Number three, some of this stuff actually needs like a high priority in problem solving, meaning rather than just saying, here's the quick answer, whatever, I think it's something where, you and your wife or whoever your partner and your child needs to take it as a priority. And every day, every night, I think it needs to be the biggest thing until you guys are able to solve this. And it should be something that you're constantly thinking about, talking about, getting advice, looking out, who has the best answers, talking with the administrators at your school, et cetera, different ways. But this has to be solved. This has to be addressed in some way. And there are a lot of different creative, examples and solutions. Some of them might not be perfect and require, some sacrifices and commitments, but this is something, again, it is a priority. It could be some out of the box solutions too. Maybe you follow your child to school, maybe with the video camera from a distance or something, you watch something happening and you actually file a lawsuit against their parents about it, take it seriously. This stuff, like the people who are bullying need to know there's accountability in the system. It can't be something that, that just gets off. And again, I don't know, again, the full details and the specifics of the situation, but those are just kind of some random thoughts. Jan FM says, do your kids use a lot of digital devices or watch TV, games, etc.? Do you avoid it to make them present in the physical world? Yeah, so my perspective is, so I grew up kind of watching TV all the time. I don't think it helped me at all. I think it was actually kind of damaging in a sense, maybe more passive. And I grew up with technology too. Grew up in Silicon Valley. I even started an app company, software. I even run a team of software engineers right now. So I'm really into technology, understand it, all that. That said, I do have concerns about certain technologies, whether it be TV or certain games, etc., where I feel like it can be almost too addictive, too much of a passive reward, meaning you're doing this activity, but it's just, you're not learning that much. You're just being entertained. It's training your mindset and your values to be shaped a certain way. And I'm working hard to shape the values of my kids in a way where I want them to be able to stand out, to be independent, to be vocal, to be able to leave their mark in society, in history. And because of that, I'm trying to grow them into, or help them grow into, strong individuals who are not afraid to go against the flow, who aren't afraid to go out and explore and to create and to build and to do things that are right. And because of that, like, that's kind of my gear of what I'm trying to accomplish. And a lot of times I don't think the TV and the games and all that stuff completely match that purpose. Now, it's not to say I'm completely against TV or games or anything like that. It's just that it was like, what's my purpose? Like, what am I aiming to do, and how does that fit in? For me, I'd rather take my kids to the park, hiking. I'd rather go camping to a national park, go to the beach, do something where they're just awed and they can, grow. I'd rather have them explore, building stuff, right? And making stuff. Like today, they're building a Lego train set with my wife. And in the morning they did this, like, they're into this whole toy called Snap Circuits. I don't know if you guys know about this, but it's an awesome toy. You can find it on Amazon, but they have like multiple sets of this thing. And my 3-year-old daughter is so funny. This is supposed to be like 8-year-old or 10-year-old toy, but my 3 and 6-year-old, they're like making these circuits and making all these like remote control cars and lights and fans and all this crazy stuff. And they love this stuff and they're so engaged with it. But it's just like that type of stuff. I'm like, hey, that's pretty cool, right? Making mistakes and building stuff. Now, I do, it's not like I'm like religiously against any technology and stuff. So we do let our kids at this age on the computer, overseeing them to kind of play with music. And, we give them some phone time where they have a timer and they kind of send messages to each other and stuff and play around with that. We don't really, at this age, really get them into games at all. I don't see the value of it at this age. When there's so much other things to explore, right? And with videos and other stuff, I'll show videos to them if I'm watching it, but it's for a purpose. Like, I'm trying to teach them about something. For example, yesterday we were watching about the internet and the internet cables through the sea. And we're watching a couple of videos of how the internet is structured and also how the cables go on land and, how the internet works, because my kids were interested in, how all this internet stuff works. And so it's like fun, like watching educational stuff like that, or even how a rocket is made or how an airplane is made. Like we're watching stuff like that, but it's because I'm trying to teach them something. I'm trying to help them, they're curious about something. And it'll change over time, at different ages. And I don't have everything figured out for when they're 8 or 10 or 12 years old, but I do have my goals that I have that I think ultimately is going to be the most valuable for their future, which is, I'm trying to build strong beliefs, strong identity, strong values, strong empathy, a lot of things that I'm very intentional about. All right, guys. Thank you for joining episode 3 of this parenting channel. I appreciate all your guys' support, and wish you guys all the best, and we'll see you in my next episode. Bye.